But there was a lot of shit said about me. And a lot of it was that my program doesn't allow anybody on it that has a brain that could speak about COVID and maybe answer some questions that I don't ask Aaron Rodgers because I have not read, I don't know what, 7,000 books to become a fucking doctor?
Correct.
So we got a doctor on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us right now.
Oh my God.
A doctor who I assume knows that he is going to get probably a buzzsaw of questions. That's kind of his life as a doctor, by the way. Doctor
sure.
always answering questions.
Oh, yeah.
Always answering questions. Now, as soon as I announced he was going to be on the show, I don't know. Everybody basically said, he's not a fucking doctor.
Yeah.
So let's find out first things first. Joining us, ladies and gentlemen, unless doctor is his first name like I wanted to do for my kid, I think an actual doctor, Dr. Drew. Dr. Drew. Doctor,
pleasure, gentlemen.
Hey, Doc, how come immediately, by the way, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you. We appreciate that a lot.
Thank
you
you,
look
Doc.
amazing. We appreciate that. How come immediately upon me saying we're going to have Dr. Drew on to, because I don't know shit about fucking this particular world. I think you probably could realize that you're talking to a guy in a tank top. I do have Dior Air Force Ones on.
Whoa.
Woo, fancy. No big deal.
Nice.
But I don't know any of this stuff. As soon as I said you were coming on, there is a litany of people that are not a real doctor. What does that even mean? And
So people love shitting on me. I don't know why, but let me give you my credentials. I'm a physician. I got an MD in 1984. I did internal medicine residency. Then I did a chief residency. Then I taught internal medicine. Then I became an assistant clinical professor of medicine. Then I went into the psychiatric field where I ran departments in a psychiatric hospital. I ended up becoming the director of chemical dependency services in 1991, something I did for over 20 years. I also then became an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry. So I've had lots of medical experience. I've seen everything. And it's why I have some opinions about what's going on with COVID.
Okay, so Doc, thank you for reading your resume. I feel like a person that has read the amount of books that you have read and the amount of hours you've spent taking tests that none of us would ever in a million years do. You shouldn't have to just read that off every single time, but it is the world that we're living in. And now, since you have a psychiatry degree, numerous ones, and you also have the medical degrees, numerous, it feels like you are the perfect person to chat to at this exact time. How come you think that right now there are two very different stances on whether or not you're going to get the vax or not get the vax? Now, I'm not saying it's 50-50, and I don't want anybody to think that I believe that it's 50-50 pro-vax, anti-vax. I have no idea what those numbers are, but why do you think we've gotten to this point where people are so... Somebody told me that I'm killing people because I'm letting Aaron come on and talk.
I know, I saw that. That's insane. And by the way, how many lives has he saved? The guy that's accusing you of killing people. Is he by signaling with his mask saving people? Exactly how many people has he saved?
Oh,
exactly.
Okay. I didn't know this is what this is going to go like. Okay, okay, Dr. Drew, I appreciate you going to bat for me there. I do that.
But be that as it may. So people are afraid. Fear is the number one motivator right now. And they're seeing all this polarization in the media. They've realized they can't believe the media. It's chock full of fake news. So they don't know who to go to. At the beginning of the pandemic, I kept saying, listen to Dr. Fauci, listen to the CDC. But they too have had sort of an adulterated course here where it's not clear that I still trust them, but I understand when people can't trust them. So who do they go to? Where do they go? Well, unfortunately, they go to their silos on the internet and they get a lot of reinforcement around material that is not exactly accurate. Also, we have the African American community who is already been mistreated by my profession for 150 years. Of course, they're not going to trust everything we hand out. And we have to rebuild that trust. And people have to not vilify, not get angry, not tell people they're going to not have access to health care if they don't get a vaccine. We have to build that rapport again and do what we know how to do, frankly, since the AIDS epidemic. We learned how to shape health behavior in the 1990s, and we've abandoned 1980s, frankly, and we abandoned all of that during this pandemic. It's been very bizarre.
Okay, so you said a lot there, obviously, and I appreciate the fact that you're so passionate about this because the world that I just been living in for, depending upon the amount of hours after Aaron comes on the show and does his thing, I assume you're in that world every single day. And when you say you still trust the CDC and the doctors, even though, and I think you used the word adulterated in a fashion that I've never heard it used before, they've kind of hit or miss, I think is what you're saying. They've been trying to...
I'm saying that they've taken questions where they've become evasive and not transparent, and that's how you build this trust. And so we must be completely transparent as clinicians and scientists about our thinking, about our uncertainty. The government has weirdly taken the attitude is you can't handle the truth. which is exactly the wrong position to take and the way to create vaccine hesitancy. It's about opening the doors, letting them in on your thinking, and show really that we are uncertain about a lot of stuff. That's the nature of medicine, and build our case why it's important for people to get vaccinated, particularly in risk populations.
So you are, if I'm hearing this, you agree with the stances on the vaccines. Why, like when Aaron explained, and by the way, I'm vaccinated, that somehow gets missed in every single time I'm told I'm a terrible human being.
I'm sure. You are a terrible human being. That's a separate thing.
Respect. I do respect that. But what, like allergies is one thing that Aaron looked into his body, and we got to assume that these people who have a lot of money, you have a lot more friends that have that era of money.
Here's where Aaron Rodgers is making a reasonable decision that no one's talking about.
Okay.
He has to go out on the field 3 days later after taking a vaccine that may remote risk cause heart inflammation. I understand that's a risk, and it's taking a healthy person and making them possibly sick. That's different than, damn, I caught this thing. I still could get the heart inflammation. I didn't want to get it, but I got it. So I'm gonna have to be very, very careful. I understand people are fearful of going from healthy to ill, particularly when they've got to hit the turf 3 days later and play it, at full capacity. I get there was kind of a tough decision there. He should have had the vaccine. He got the illness. Okay, what's the big deal?
Okay, so people, and this leads right into the next question beautifully, and we appreciate you, Dr. Drew, who is an actual doctor.
Yes.
Turns out.
Medical doctor.
Wow. And brain doctor, psychiatry doctor. These are all his things. We put them off the website. Let's go. Check the resume, yeah. Dr. Drew.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. By the way, nobody ever does that. Thank you for doing that. Those are all my board certifications. I'm double boarded. Those are all my professorships and fellowships. I've got lots of them. So there you go.
Well, Doc, we're proud of you for having all those. And also last night while I was getting an onslaught of he's not an actual doctor, I was thinking to myself, Dr. Drew has been a doctor my entire life. Is this guy not a doctor? And Zito, our guy, looked him up and said, boom, here they are. Okay, so let's talk about the vaccine. And you said he got COVID because he wasn't vaccinated. It feels like now I was vaccinated, I got COVID. Bad. Yeah. I got a pretty bad one now. I had 104.5 degree fever. It was great.
Nasty.
There are some people that aren't vaccinated who got COVID that weren't as bad as me. I think it's a strain thing. The vaccine is not a 100%er. It is just a build, like the boost. This is just a buildup of a shield. Is that how it should be painted?
It helps prevent. I keep telling people we don't have a way to stop this thing, and we don't have a way to make it better once you've contracted it completely. We have a way of reducing complication. Like when I got sick, I had bad COVID. I was sick for almost 3 months. But a week in, I got monoclonal antibodies. No one had ever heard of that then. And I thought, oh my God, this kept me out of the hospital. So I went out on Instagram Live and kept pumping it out there. And of course, people are so paranoid. What you get back is, who's paying you to say this? Or, oh, just because you're a special person, you got it. No, they're free. The government bought it, and it's available to everybody. My profession froze during this pandemic and really didn't even learn what's available for patients, and that's still happening to this day. It's very bizarre.
Okay,
it's really wild what happened.
So let's dive in on the Ivermectin then. So the Ivermectin is obviously a big conversation piece. I mean, it is a big piece, and immediately,
which is weird.
Well, it's because, and I think you and I both know this, in the world that we live in, and I'm in the sports world, but I have friends on both ends of the spectrum, literally both ends of the spectrum, which I wish more people would do, by the way. I'm learning there's probably not a lot of people who have that, but both ends of the spectrum understood. As soon as Trump pushed something, right? That was going to become an immediate boom. And then if you get Joe Rogan involved, and Joe Rogan's another polarizing figure for whatever reason, even though incredibly successful and has, grinded at this for a long time, but he is hated by some people. As soon as they start pushing it, then a narrative starts getting built. Is Ivermectin something in your eyes that is, it has just been demonized because you hear people talk about it?
It has been demonized. So here's a couple levers on it. So we have 2 new antivirals that are now approved for emergency use, Paxlovid and Molnupiravir. They are excellent. Problem is, I can't get my hands on them. I've been calling pharmacies for 2 days. They're not distributing it. Why not? I don't understand. Those 2 medications make Ivermectin look like a pop gun compared to an Uzi. I mean, it really is. Ivermectin, if it works, it's on the margin. But when we had nothing else to do, it was harmless. Look, in this country, if you come into this country from most countries, you're required to take ivermectin. We just, as a part of the immigration policy, we give it to everybody that comes in. I've used it for decades, literally, a harmless medicine. So the harmlessness and that it might do a little something, people go, okay, let's use it. But when we have better therapies, it's going to kind of fade away. But the fact that people started using this moniker about it being a horse medication, I was talking to Kroll about this yesterday, and he goes, why don't people say, look, there's brushes for horses and brushes for girls. Are we not allowed to use brushes now because there's brushes for horses? Oh, okay. It's the same idea.
Yeah, it's used in both there. Now, the money, the conversation, and you said everybody's become so skeptical about everything whenever you push the monoclonal antibodies and said, who's paying you to say this? That has become a real thing, right? Because a lot of people's investments have been made public. Maybe they're wrong, maybe they're not, but they've taken a lot of turn. Those same people are potentially in some power, controlling some stuff. How do we know? How are people supposed to know? Like, for instance, all these vaccine companies, they made like billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to this entire thing. And there's some people that are like, oh, everything is being forced through these pharma companies because of how much money they are grossly making in their own pockets. How do we separate like personal advancement financially from also can help? You know what I mean? How do you get those people?
Yeah, so let's do two things. When there's profits to be made, there's enthusiasm and marketing, right? Like there's another medicine that is quite effective, it looks like, early in COVID called fluvoxamine. It's an old SSRI antidepressant that has anti-inflammatory properties on the brain. I took it for my long hauler syndrome. It cleared things up in 30 minutes. It was crazy effective for me, not for everybody. Again, cost pennies, harmless medicine, not using it for the antidepressant properties, using it for the anti-inflammatory properties, and it's not being pushed because no one's making money on it. And in fact, a friend of mine was in a situation where another doctor accused him of being paid by somebody because he was pushing fluvoxamine so hard. We have an obligation as physicians to always put those disclosures up front. So if it's a doctor talking, he or she will say, hey, I work for this company X, and here's my opinion, based on we also have to talk about the entire subject and class. We're obliged to do all that, but we have to say that all up front. So if it's a physician, it's that. If it's a drug company or a journalist, who knows?
Yeah, but nobody's really going to physicians, right? The physicians are just on TV or on the internet. Like this, for instance. So you saying you have to disclose who has an investment and whatever and everything. That's not happening in like mass press conferences, right? Like that's not something that's potentially taking place there. So
it should be. I mean, the CDC, they have strict, they can't be. I don't know. I'd be shocked if they have any sort of, they have funding for their research that comes in through pharma. But personally, if they have any direct relation, that would be tough if they didn't disclose that a lot.
Okay, that's a great answer, by the way. That's a huge piece of information. And I am trying to ask as many questions as I see from either side here. Let's go to the vaccine, super vaccine. Are they in the right of saying that the unvaccinated are potentially affecting them and their family and the way our world is? Do you think?
In other words, unvaccinated are harming other people. The only thing the unvaccinated harm themselves. If that's that. I mean, the fact is, the people like yourself, people break through with the vaccine all the time, and you are still infectious. The reality that here's the two things that concern us, though. If you're vaccinated, you tend to be producing virus for a shorter period of time. So you may be at risk of exposing other people for temporarily a shorter period, which is good, right? You may infect less people. Number two, the duration of viral activation, viral replication determines to some degree the extent for mutation. So the more virus, the more time replicating, the more mutation. And that's the only really scary thing going on right now. Now, we all may get sort of immunized or inoculated by Omicron. I've seen so literally 100 cases of Omicron in the last week. It's been unbelievable. Super mild in the vaccinated, right? Crazy mild. Like most of them didn't even know they had it. That's how mild it is. And they're going to have now a hybrid, really solid immunity. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? It's hard to tell. We worry that having all that virus around may create more potential for mutation. My sense is it's a net positive. People are going to be very much immunized by this virus now.
Okay, so Omicron is a fast runner. We heard about it coming out of California. It was being promoted as being like, hey, this is the biggest, baddest, COVID of all time. This is bigger. It ended up being the fastest, I think. It spreads the fastest.
It's incredibly infectious, but it is, if you're vaccinated, it's mild. I mean, it is mild. Now, I have an unvaccinated guy who's very sick with it. I think, again, we're not always getting the genetic subtyping of these viruses, but I think that's what he's got. And he could have Delta, it's possible, but he's quite ill. So if you're unvaccinated, Omicron can still hurt you.
Okay, so by the way, great statement right there. We appreciate you saying all the things you're saying. Dr. Drew, who's an actual doctor, we saw his certificates and degrees. So with COVID-19, the OG here, right? I mean, who knows how it took over the entire world. Then there was Delta came through, and then now Omicron coming through, and it's the weakest one, right? COVID-19, the original wave, strongest of all time, right? I mean, that's the strongest of all time. That was nasty. That was the most nasty. Rest in peace. Terrible what it did to the entire world. Stopped the entire world. Delta, also strong, but not as strong as COVID-19, right? Omicron now seems to be, are we phasing? You can't make any absolutes, I understand. But in your eyes, is this a natural progression of a viral disease? And are we going to have to deal with this forever like the flu, or is there a chance this thing ends soon?
I think it's going to be around forever. There are certainly virologists that believe that it's likely to become weaker and weaker with time. It's an advantage evolutionarily for the virus, right? To kind of be able to move around amongst us and just survive with us, rather than having us try to stamp it out and it killing us. So it just makes sort of intuitive sense from an evolutionary perspective that the virus would want to coexist with us peaceably. Now, that doesn't mean that's what will happen. This has been a very bizarre virus. It's been unusual in terms of its structure, it's how it has mutated, how it has affected the human body. So anything is possible. My prayers are certainly that it will go the direction that makes evolutionary sense towards a milder cold.
What did you mean there in the middle? You start taking some shots at the way this thing is built, and you're talking about it as if we live peacefully.
We worry that it was something constructed in the lab, and so it doesn't necessarily follow the usual rules.
See, but you can't say, remember back in the day when that was even mentioned. If it was even mentioned that it came,
you're a racist. You're a racist if you mentioned it.
Worst human of all time. Because we're all trying.
I watched Dr. Fauci. He's like, I got involved in radio because of Anthony Fauci. Back in 1983, he was chanting to us young physicians. I was deep in the AIDS epidemic. I was taking care of so many AIDS patients. It was wild back then, and it was horrible. It was a horrible experience, and we couldn't do anything. He just said, you got to go out there and educate young people about the risks. And so that's how I got involved with radio. And I've been through 4 subsequent pandemics with him. So, SMERS, SARS-1, H1N1. H1N1 was a horrible pandemic, and you don't even know what happened. That's the crazy thing. That's what I kept saying at the beginning of this. Like, we've been through some bad ones. Calm down, everybody. We'll get through it. Pandemics are defined by excess death. It will suck, but panic is not going to help anything. So what was your question? I've already lost my train of thought.
No, it's okay. You actually led me to another one, because we've been at the beginning of this thing, and you brought up Dr. Fauci, who, I saw throw one of the worst opening pitches in the history of baseball. I think.
Baba Booey.
Yeah, it was similar. I mean, it was a bad one.
Terrible.
And I try to stay out of the real world, honestly, because I think people expect me and hope for me. And I think what my job is to come in and just be like a vacation for people. So I literally tried my best to stay out of everything. But in the world that we're in, especially with the internet, shit's going to make its way in. Fauci's had quite a, particular run. It has kind of come and gone. Immediately at the beginning, 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks became a month, and then it's obviously led into whatever it is. And people had their thoughts, I think, about him very early. And then it's kind of got cemented in there. What are your thoughts on Dr. Fauci? And
So that's where some of the vaccine hesitancy comes from. I was very disappointed when he was testifying in front of Congress, and they asked him about, gathering in public places. No, it's dangerous. How about if you're demonstrating? Well, I don't know what you're asking me. It's like, no, dude, just answer the damn question. Don't play those games. That's where he lost me. He is back. I saw him in an interview 2 days ago, and I thought, there's the Anthony Fauci I have come to know and love. He's back. He sort of landed. He was stuck in some sort of political quagmire. I don't know what was happening to him, but he was adulterated by that, as I said earlier.
The word.
I've been through 5 pandemics with him. He is an exceptional clinician. He's been an extraordinary resource for this country. He was whom I kept saying you should look to for guidance. Something went on politically where we all lost our minds for a little while. I think when this is all done, and by the way, his lack of transparency is what created vaccine hesitancy. So I'm not letting him off the hook for that. That was a big mistake. But when the day is done, I do believe he will revert to the mean, and he will be the guy I know him to be, who is excellent. And I remember now the other question you asked me, which is the one day I knew we could talk about the possibility of a China lab production was when he said, well, maybe it came from a Chinese lab. But we'll have to look into that. And all of a sudden, everything changed. You can now talk about science again, the possibility of investigating where a virus came from.
Okay, let's talk about science, because that was something I was attacked for yesterday as well, because Aaron talked about peer reviews and everything like that. Whenever you go through all of these new, like the CDC, for instance, just changed from 10 days to 5 days for the quarantine. Then the internet immediately said, well, that's because the Delta CEO said 4,000 planes can't be delayed. I thought the NFL was going to have to make a change, and everybody else will kind of feel the ripple effect. In turn, which might make sense because I'm just a sports meathead, the CDC makes a change and all the other leagues kind of ripple out from that point. As soon as the CDC said go 10 days to 5 days, the NFL was like, there it is. We're going to do this as well. And everybody did that. You said you have a lot of faith in the CDC and how hard it is to get infiltrated there. You think that was done because of the data and analytics that they're seeing from the newest COVID?
Yes.
And do you think that will only continue to go?
That fit my experience perfectly. And they made a good decision, and not an easy decision, but because they get vilified too. But that absolutely fits the clinical syndrome. It looks to me, this is now I'm going to give you an opinion. This is now not peer reviewed. This is not the literature. I can only give you my clinical experience.
Hey, don't be spreading misinformation on this program. All right.
So it's not going to be a super exciting observation, but I have noticed that the testing for Omicron is kind of nefarious. It's sort of all over the place. I think most people with Omicron are only producing significant virus for very short periods of time. And so people are negative, they test negative throughout, they only test positive for a minute. That being the case means they are not very infectious very long. Once they clear the virus to the point where you can't detect it on a test, you're not contagious. And that's essentially what they're saying. And they're noticing the same thing I'm noticing, that it's a very short-lived period of viral productivity where you could be infectious.
Do you think, now I don't know if you're going to be a pundit, misinformation spreader, or a psychiatrist or a medical doctor in this answer, are we near the end of this thing? You know, it feels like everybody's about fed up. I mean, granted, there's still a lot of very passionate people. I experienced them last night. I was told I'm killing people because Aaron comes on here and speaks. It has been incredible talking to you, by the way. I feel like we've all learned a lot and we appreciate you. I feel like some trust maybe has been earned back because Dr. Drew has given people the OG, he's okay. Whenever you talk about the world getting back into it from a psychiatry standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from an advancement standpoint, this is going to be a nightmare, isn't it? I mean, this is a whole new world now we've been living in for 2 years. Coming out of it is going to be a nightmare, right?
It's really hard to say. I mean, you're asking a difficult question. And it has been very bizarre. I mean, this has been a crazy experience. When I started noticing people talking about Nazis everywhere and Russian operatives there, I thought, wow, if you had said this to me 5 years ago, I would have put you into the psychiatric hospital. And now that kind of delusional, rigid, over-the-top, histrionic thinking became just routine everywhere. I feel like that's settling. I think that will settle. And as that settles, people will be able to make more rational decisions. I think we are tired. I think people are assessing reality on their own terms. Reality does have a way of creeping in, and you can't avoid it. And the reality is this thing is milder. We're getting vaccinated. We're taking reasonable approaches. We have therapeutics now. We have monoclonal antibodies. We have Paxlovid. The panic needs to go away. We need to go about our business and live with this thing. I think people are enthusiastic about that, maybe too much so, and that we need to sort of take a very moderate course to all this and move forward and be, there's a time for courage too. You know what I'm saying? There's a time to stand up and go, okay, it's time to live. That survival is not the priority, but living and living well and flourishing really needs to be our priority. Let's stand up. Let's move forward. We've got a lot of great treatments available. Life is risky. Let's move forward and let's live together again, and not be stuck in this delusional quagmire.
I love the motivational speech you just gave. Wouldn't that be a celebration of the medicine and science if we did move forward? It's like, hey, we got the treatments. Vaccines are good for you. If people don't want it, let them deal with that.
Yeah, exactly. Why this isn't, that's precisely it. That why we didn't, I mean, we've had these, I knew at the outset of this pandemic that no one in the world is better than the United States, the medical system and the research we have at responding and improvising. I knew we would come up with treatments. I knew we would come up with vaccines. I was confident about that. And here we are 2 years later, we have great therapeutics and we have good vaccines. Celebrate that. It's we saved the world. It's an extraordinary thing. And yes, pandemics suck. They're defined by excess death. If excess people aren't dying, we are not in a pandemic anymore, and we should act accordingly.
We beat COVID, dude.
Well, we gave ourselves what is necessary to do so. How we really get through it, it's a black box, and we have to operate our way through. But we shouldn't be sheltering in place. We shouldn't be hiding. We shouldn't be attacking each other. We shouldn't be delusional and paranoid. We should stand up with a little bit of courage and walk forward. And by the way, let the medical system work. Work with your physician to make these decisions. Why anybody has any opinion about what Joe Rogan does with his doctor is offensive to me. That's between him and his doctor and just the two of them and no one else.
Isn't it awesome? I say you're coming on the show. He's not a real doctor. Then I call Dr. Joe Rogan, and that's a slap in your face as well. You can't win, but doctors never see people when they're good. You only see people when you're bad, so you have to build up callous to all that. Last question here before we let you go. We can't thank you enough. Immunity. Whenever when you get the shot, the vaccine, how long should that shield, you think, remain? The boost shield, should it remain? And also, if you get Omicron, is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Do we know anything about how long you should be good?
So we know a lot about the vaccines, and I think most people are aware they decay with time, they wane, even the booster wanes. You're pretty good. There's a whole story to be told. What wanes is the antibody response, which is the direct neutralizing effect on the virus. But we also have a T cell army waiting behind to mount an attack on the virus should we get infected. That story has yet to be fully elucidated. We don't know for sure how that's going to work. My bet is we're going to be pretty good for years. My other bet is if you have vaccine and any of the variants, you are what some people are calling super immunity. It's a hybrid immunity that in all likelihood will be excellent for years.
So I'm vaxxed, and I got like the strongest son of a bitch out of there.
You should be good. I'm not saying you won't get sick. You might get sick with something, but it's not going to bother you if you get it.
And my T cells are going to come.
Exactly right.
Hey, we can't thank you enough, Dr. Drew. Ladies and gentlemen, a man who has like 47 degrees, Dr. Drew. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Doc.
Nice to meet you guys.
Hey, you too, man. Come on again, please.
I love it.
All right, you're the man.